Hello and welcome to the Manatee Glens Report. I'm Sandra Guffey, Director of Public Relations for Manatee Glens, our community's specialty hospital and outpatient practice for mental health and addictions. Popular television programs have showcased hoarding and those who can barely live in their homes because of overwhelming clutter, dirt, or an unhealthy number of pets. Some of these people suffer from a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, otherwise known as OCD. We'll be addressing that today, as well as other forms of OCD. With us is Dr. Robert Boxley, a supervising psychologist with Manatee Glens. Thank you so much, Dr. Boxley, for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Let's start with, what is it that you do at Manatee Glens?
I supervise a number of interns, do a lot of training and presentations, such as this and other things, on various mental health and substance abuse related disorders.
And you've been doing that for a while now?
About 15 years or so.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, when we talk about obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, what do we mean by that? What is that?
Before I answer that,
okay,
it probably would be better to tell you what it's not.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay, because so many people kind of mention this in a way that isn't really accurate.
Okay.
So for instance, I was just talking to somebody I work with, and she was mentioning that she orders her laundry by different colored hangers in her laundry room. And she was saying, this might be OCD. And I said, no, that's organization.
That's great.
Okay? Yeah, that's wonderful. So a lot of people think OCD is people who are highly organized have OCD, and that's not the case at all. Also, sometimes people that want things a very particular way, they may think, oh, they have OCD. Not true. They're having strong opinions about how you want things is not really obsessive compulsive.
No.
So I just had to point out that those two things are not OCD.
That's good. That's helpful, because I think it has become sort of a catchphrase like, oh, I'm so depressed, or oh, you're so OCD, when really what you're saying is you're more of a perfectionist than I am, and that bothers me.
It's something like that. And like when your son or daughter comes home and they got a 96 on a report and are upset they didn't get 100, that isn't necessarily OCD either. That is, they just have high expectations for themselves. They thought that they would do better, and they didn't.
We like that in a child.
Yes, we like them to excel and try to do better, yes.
Yes. Okay.
But all of those things are not OCD.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Can put some minds at ease that they don't have that disorder.
Yes, that is not OCD. I mean, what OCD is really debilitating. So, so people with true obsessive compulsive disorder have repeated intrusive thoughts that just come into their minds out of the blue. So they're watching TV, they're just living their lives, and suddenly an overwhelming thought, say that their hands are dirty, or that they might have gotten a disease, or something enters their mind. And it repeatedly enters their mind over and over again. Almost in some ways, metaphorically, it kind of kidnaps their mind, so that eventually they can't think of anything else other than the fact that their hands are dirty or that they've been contaminated in some way.
They're obsessed.
They're obsessed, yes. They become obsessed with that thought, so much so that they can't function. And their anxiety builds, and they get more and more anxious. But they have a solution. They have a ransom they can pay to the kidnappers, and that is they can wash their hands, they can do some ritual, they can count to 5 They can turn around in circles. They can do something, and then the thoughts go away, the anxiety goes down, and all's well with the world for a little while, until the thought comes in again, and they have to do it over and over again. And
compulsive. Doing it over and over.
Yeah, the compulsive part is having to do that behavior in order to make the anxiety go away. And that is an awful dance where, you know, your brain is kidnapped and you have to pay this ransom, and then it's kidnapped again and you have to pay this ransom over and over again. And the longer you go of not doing the behavior that's going to make the anxiety go away, the worse the anxiety gets, until it's almost overwhelming and you just can't function. And that's why so many people pay the ransom. They wash their hands, they count, they check things repeatedly. All these things are in service of lowering that anxiety, making that anxiety go away.
So there's elements of anxiety that we see in OCD. We're seeing, what else? Can trauma play a role? Can that bring about some kind of an OCD, or where does it come from?
Well, where it comes from is kind of tricky, although it does run in families. Like you sometimes see that families with anxiety problems, OCD can show up in those families more often than in families where it isn't an issue. So there might be a genetic component, or might be something like that. It's not really clear, but these intrusive thoughts can come out of the blue and can be practically anything, really. What is clear with OCD is it's going to manifest really in your teens. So it's rare to see it just come out of the blue much after you're 19 or 20. So you're going to start to see manifestations of OCD much younger, you know, when you're in middle or high school.
Okay, so now would it be important then to get treatment when they're younger?
Absolutely, yeah. The sooner you get treatment, the more coping strategies people will develop, and the fewer incidences of debilitating OCD are going to occur, because it can be quite debilitating.
Well, yeah, how could you go to work if you have to spend all your, you know, every few minutes you're getting up to wash your hands or whatever that is?
Well, yeah, I worked with one fellow, and his obsession was electrical outlets in his household. So what he had to do was, before he went to work, he had to unplug every electrical outlet in his household. And before he went out the door, then he had to go back and check again that all the outlets were unplugged. And then when he got halfway to work, he had to turn around and come back to recheck that all the outlets were unplugged. And once that occurred, then he might be able to successfully go to work. But sometimes he had to, when he got to work, turn around and go back and recheck again. All in service of making sure that the electrical outlets were unplugged. And you can imagine what that would do to your refrigerator, or all these things that we keep plugged in all the time. They had to be unplugged, or else he just couldn't leave the household for fear it might catch on fire, or he had some vague feeling of doom if he did not do this. So you can imagine what one's life would be like under those circumstances.
No, I can't.
Yes.
I mean, I do remember leaving a few times wondering if did I unplug my curling iron? But there's a big difference between, I wonder if I did, and having to go back and check.
Yes.
And so obviously this gentleman what do you do for him? When he comes to you and says, this is what's going on, what do you do then?
Well, I think that the tried and true treatment for real obsessive compulsive disorders are to put as much space between the thought and the action to relieve the anxiety. So, because it's kind of like you put off paying the ransom as long as you can. So your brain has been kidnapped by this intrusive thought, and it is there, and your anxiety is building and building and building. At some point, if you can postpone paying the ransom, there's actually a break in the system, and the anxiety goes away. The obsess, you disconnected the compulsion from the obsession, and you aren't troubled anymore.
That must feel fantastic.
Oh,
euphoric.
Yeah, some clients actually report that they feel a click, like in their, like they can actually feel it when it breaks.
It's switched off.
It isn't there anymore. They don't have to pay the ransom anymore. Now, granted, you have to do this several times, many times, but the idea is if you can postpone the compulsion, the action, the ritual, the checking, the washing, whatever it is, you have eventually, if you postpone it long enough, it just breaks. And then it's no longer obsessive compulsive disorder. You might still have obsessive thoughts like wondering if the curling iron was plugged in. And you might have like the thing, well, maybe I should turn back and go home, but it's not a compulsion like you have to or else.
Yes. And I imagine that that's not something where somebody can just say, well, why don't you just quit? Why don't you, just like we don't tell an addict, somebody who is suffering from an addiction, well, why don't you just stop drinking, or why don't you just stop? That doesn't work, does it, to just tell somebody, why don't you just stop?
Not really, because the anxiety is just so, I think it's hard for people who don't have this to realize how intense the anxiety is, how strong that need to do something to make the anxiety go away. You know, I can only think that it's almost like a bit of like psychic torture in some ways, that the anxiety gets to that level. And the problem is they have a tried and true way to make that anxiety go away. All they have to do is wash their hands, check, whatever, and it goes away, right? So telling them to stop, it's hard to say where you should tell somebody to stop. Stop having intrusive thoughts. Great, but they're automatic. You try to make them go away anyway.
Don't think of the pink elephant in the room. Well, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, so that doesn't work.
Yeah. So now, where does hoarding come into this? Because that's, now that you're talking about this obsession, I can see it's an obsession with wanting stuff or of not throwing away something, and more stuff, maybe it feels comforting, but how does that work?
There's a small percentage of hoarders that actually have OCD. About like 15% or so of hoarders also have obsessive compulsive disorder. And for that percentage of people with obsessive compulsive disorder that also hoard, it almost always is kind of as I described. They are accumulating objects because they have to. That's the compulsive part. And if the objects are not arranged in the right order, or aren't the right colors, or aren't don't have particular qualities that they need, their anxiety may go up until they get those things in order. So unlike the show on TV on TLC that has, I've never seen like a OCD hoarder on that show. They're really more compulsive hoarders, because a OCD hoarder would have everything in nice boxes, color-coded, in order, and now it might be floor to ceiling, it might be all over the place in their house, but it might be in the Dewey Decimal System. They, like I said, color-coded, they know exactly where everything is, and they might be quite disturbed if any of those things get out of place. That's what a hoarder that has OCD would look like. That's not what you see on the hoarding show.
No, not at all.
For those,
they're messy, really.
Yes,
they're
for
messy
those,
hoarders.
yeah, those are more just compulsive hoarders.
They're just,
which is a totally different disorder, really.
And going in and cleaning up their house isn't really the answer. It's not a housekeeping problem that they have. They have a mental health issue.
Yeah, it is a totally separate
not
mental...
that they don't know how to clean their house. Something else is going on there.
Oh, absolutely. Even on a brain level, their brains look different than people with OCD, than with other disorders. So yes, they are qualitatively different.
Okay.
The compulsive hoarders to someone with OCD.
And it could also, I think I saw one of the shows, that really they had a shopping addiction. That that their problem was that they shopped all the time, and then they brought all this stuff home, and there's nowhere to put it all.
Right.
So that's a different issue there.
Yes, and like some people with a shopping addiction may shop, but they also then may sell it on eBay or do something else so that it's yes, they're getting the thrill of shopping and finding a deal, but then they're getting it out of their lives. So they aren't really hoarders. They've got a shopping addiction without the hoarding. Okay. The hoarding is really problematic for the people that are pure hoarders, without obsessive compulsive, because for those folks, they are accruing all kinds of things. Sometimes useless things,
right,
but sometimes useful things. And for them, they're accruing it, but they are not getting much in the way of satisfaction from it. And what's very different from them, from someone with like OCD, is the people with OCD, every one of them I've ever worked with, knows that what they're doing is not healthy, not right, wrong. They just know that there's something wrong in their lives when they're doing this. They feel the wrongness of it. Well, compulsive hoarders do not feel the wrongness of it. They may not even notice the wrongness of it. And that's one of the differences between a compulsive hoarder and someone with OCD is even a obsessive compulsive, someone with OCD and hoarding knows that there's something wrong with floor to ceiling, color-coded bins of various things, and
they might be a little embarrassed by it. They wouldn't invite you into your house and say, hey, let me show you my color-coded bins with stuff.
Absolutely, they would feel that. Whereas someone with a compulsive hoarding disorder may not notice this. And
come on in.
Yeah, come on in, and as you walk between all their piles of paper or whatever, they're not feeling badly about it at all.
And that could be dangerous if they have children. They don't realize that this is unhealthy. And that's where we see the bugs and the rats and everything, and that's totally different. Yes.
And some of the brain studies they've done with compulsive hoarders are fascinating, because they've found that the portion of the brain that makes decisions, that particularly makes decisions about having things in your life or assessing for risk, like whether something is safe or not safe, or making decisions as to whether to get rid of things or not, or to accrue things, that is kind of understimulated in compulsive hoarders. So that part of the brain is a little dimmer than it is with other people, even people with OCD. So that part of the brain is just a little dimmer, a little less active. So it makes perfect sense that they would walk through a house, they would not see the rat droppings, or if they did, they wouldn't see the risk involved with that, and they wouldn't even recognize really the problem with the stacks of things or the mess, you see? So it, even on a brain level, it's very different than OCD.
It's all about the brain.
Well, a little bit.
Well, it is. You're a psychologist.
Yeah,
you could say that.
Bit,
yes.
Now, one of the cool things about this is the research is so compelling that in May, the new DSM, which is kind of a manual for mental health disorders, is coming out. And for the first time, they are having a completely separate diagnosis for compulsive hoarding. It's never been separate. It's always been a subset of OCD. And over the last 10, 15 years, the research has been very clear, like the brain research I talked about, that it is distinct. It is a different disorder than OCD. Although some people with OCD do hoard.
So this is breaking news here on METV, that we have this distinct separation now, and everybody has heard it here first.
I don't know if it's breaking news.
Yeah, I think so. We'll call it that. That's good.
Okay.
Now, there's one other aspect that we wanted to talk about: extreme perfectionism, which is, hard to see that on the same spectrum with somebody who hoards. But tell me about that. And when we're saying extreme perfectionism, we're not talking about somebody who just likes to have everything color coordinated. This is beyond that.
Well,
right?
Sometimes when people talk about extreme perfectionism, they're really talking about, there's a small number of people with OCD that have an incredible need for symmetry, for order, for things to be in a certain way. And the television show Monk had him want, all the pencils in a certain way. And there is a quality of some OCD that wants order to an extreme degree. Right. That really isn't perfectionism. That is more a need for order and symmetry.
Okay.
So having 2 things instead of 3 things. 3 things is not symmetry. You need 4 for symmetry. And that would be that need.
Okay.
And if you had OCD and you had needs for symmetry, what you would need to do is you would need to make it right. You'd need, if there were 2, if there were 3, you'd need to take 1 away or add 1 for 4. Right?
Okay.
And actually, this display here would be great for them because we have symmetry.
Yes,
we have 2 and 2. We have 2.
2 glasses of water,
we have 2.
people,
They might be concerned because you have a paper and I don't. So that's
yeah.
not symmetry.
Yes.
So that kind of, it's not really perfectionism, it's order and symmetry.
Right.
Now, perfectionism is, how to put this? Perfectionism is really a distortion of reality. It's a cognitive distortion because if you're applying it to a human being, say, I think everybody would own that they are not perfect. Right?
I'll be the first in line on that
I'll be second.
one. Yes, okay.
Okay. And everybody would kind of own that it is impossible, really, to be perfect.
Right.
So applying perfectionistic ideas towards a human being lacks a little bit of reality testing because it's an impossible thing. So perfectionism as a goal is really like wishing that we could breathe water or fly or do these other impossible things for humans.
So it keeps them from living a full and real life because they're not going to take any reasonable risks if they could fail.
Absolutely, there's that. But there's also, you'll be constantly disappointed in yourself because you will constantly fail to be perfect because you're human. So a lot of perfectionistic folks, while they're striving to be perfect, they are also constantly doubting themselves, doubting that they can be perfect. And they're doubting themselves for good reason, because they're human and they can't be perfect. So they're setting up really unrealistic expectations of perfection that they can't possibly ever...
Horrible burden to live under.
Oh, it is. Oh.
And so what do you do for treatment? Do you medications, therapy, counseling, mixed combination?
One of the consequences of this kind of distortion of your thinking is that it undermines your sense of self-esteem. You start to feel like you can't ever be successful because you're always getting 98% on all your tests. You can't get 100% all the time. Or there's always somebody who is higher up than you at work, or something is not right. And you start to incorporate that into your view of yourself. So a lot of people with perfectionism begin to be quite depressed. They begin to seek out like substances. Eating disorders and perfectionism tend to go together, particularly anorexia.
Right.
And unfortunately, people who are real perfectionistic with regard to themselves can become suicidal because they are a failure.
There's no way to ever measure up.
Yeah, you've set it up to where you've aspired to something that is impossible, and then you beat yourself up for not attaining the impossible. And so, and repeatedly, over and over, years and years of it, and that can wear you down to the point that you feel quite hopeless.
Yes, absolutely. And do you see a lot of people with this, or tell me a little bit about how widespread is that as a disorder?
Well, like perfectionism. Perfectionism is not as widespread. Perfectionism to a clinically destructive thing is not as prevalent as people having very high expectations, and because I work with a lot of people who are becoming doctors, or in school, in graduate school, and almost all of them have very high expectations for themselves. They're all high achievers. They excel. They've always been at the top of their class. They've always been, that 98%.
Yes, they were all valedictorians. They get to grad school and found out everybody is valedictorian.
Yes, they're all like that. And that's fine, because trying to excel, trying to be better is not perfectionism.
No.
I was talking to someone just the other day. They were talking about, don't you want your brain surgeon to be a perfectionist?
I like that, yes.
Yes, and actually you don't. You want your brain surgeon to be excellent. You want them to excel. You want them to constantly be trying to be a better brain surgeon, but you don't want your brain surgeon to think that they need to be perfect. Because if they try to be perfect, they may be rooting around in your brain for a long time because there was that one little thing that they didn't check on that they need to check on.
Because my brain's not perfect. He might be the perfectionist, but my brain isn't perfect. And good luck on that. Let's end with a high note. There's always hope. There's healing. All of these people that you work with on a daily basis, you see results. Tell us the
absolutely.
story.
Well, this would be a common story for most people with OCD. I mentioned that kind of click you actually feel, and helping people. I'm thinking of one case where, like hand washing to a degree where you're actually taking off layers of skin, that you could buy stock in a soap company and make money because you're buying so much soap, and she was able to kind of put off washing her hands, even though she had this compelling need to wash her hands, until she felt that click. And then for weeks after that, just that one time, she didn't have any need to wash her hands again. And then a few months later, it kind of came back shortly, but all she did was she just pushed it off until it broke again. And after a while, she got mastery. She got her life back. And she no longer had to worry about where the soap was. She no longer had to figure out where the bathrooms were on her way to work or school or whatever, because if she got that urge, she needed to know where she could go and wash her hands. She no longer had to structure her life around that. And but it was not pretty.
No.
That getting to that break causes lots of pain, but you pay once to break it. You have intense anxiety for a short period of time, and then it's gone. And that's what a lot of people, try to do this, and they give up right when they're near the mountaintop. And I would just encourage people, get some help, and with your therapist work with you, you can get that break happening.
Excellent, excellent, and that's great advice for everything in life. Stay with it through the pain.
Yeah.
That does wrap up this edition of the Manatee Glens Report. Thank you very much, Dr. Boxley, our guest from Manatee Glens, and thank you, the audience, for tuning into the Manatee Glens Report here on METV, where you can learn something new every day. We'll see you next time.